By 2034, our world could look very different. And the HiFiMAN Mini Shangri-La might be a sign of things to come. We're already seeing massive change in our world with the proliferation of smart devices, electric vehicles replacing internal combustion, changes to how we work and we play, and even changes to the audiophile landscape as products get cheaper and better. Who knows, by 2034, you might be using a fridge, a lawnmower, and even a car made by HiFiMAN, because they seem to be intent on taking over the world as they consistently deliver products that are both extremely well priced and also extremely well performing. And that seems to be in whatever category they turn their hand to. So far, they've made great planar magnetic headphones, great R2R DACs, great wireless headphones, great IEMs, and great wireless IEMs. I suppose it made sense for them then to recalibrate the entire electrostatic market as well. The Mini Shangri-La system is bringing electrostatic performance to everybody. At $2,300 for both the Energizer and the headphone, it makes electrostatic headphones accessible for almost any audiophile so long as you're willing to save a little bit of money and take a bit of time. That's a far cry from the systems that most of us think about when we think about electrostatics, where suddenly we're in the realm of the $10,000 mark. Of course, with a lower price tag does come a few compromises, and you'll need to watch on to see if they're compromises that you're okay with, but it's exciting to have a proper desktop-style electrostatic solution in this price bracket. Before we dive into sound quality and some comparisons, let's just cover off the basics of electrostatics in case you're new to it. Electrostatic headphones are a little bit like planar magnetic headphones in the sense that both use a very lightweight, flat membrane, and that membrane moves with the musical signal to produce the sound that we hear. Where they differ though, is that instead of magnets on either side of the driver and a musical signal passing through the membrane as it does with planar magnetics, an electrostatic driver has a high voltage static charge applied to it, and then the musical signal passes through electrodes on either side of it in the place of where the magnets would be on a planar magnetic headphone. That difference in design means that an electrostatic diaphragm can be much lighter than those in planar magnetics, because they don't need to have the wires travelling through the membrane to carry the musical signal. A lighter membrane can result in a more responsive driver that extracts more detail and texture from the sound. It's also theoretically going to be able to deliver better spatial accuracy to improve things like soundstage size and imaging focus. That said, it's not all good news, because lighter drivers can lack authority and punch sometimes, and that can lead to a leaner and less tactile bass experience. They also require more than 500 volts of static charge or bias, and so you can't just plug an electrostatic headphone into any old headphone amp, and that is where the Energizer comes into play. Think of the Energizer in an electrostatic system as the headphone amp. That means that you still need a DAC to deliver the musical signal into the Mini Shangri-La Energizer. But once the signal arrives at the Energizer, everything else is taken care of and you don't need any other devices. What's nice is that HiFiMAN have stuck to the industry standards with the Mini Shangri-La system, and so you can use the Mini Shangri-La Energizer with other electrostatic headphones from brands like Stax. And you can also use the Mini Shangri-La headphones with other Energizers, for example those from Stax and those from Topping. And I have a much lower priced Energizer from Topping that we'll talk about in just a moment. Before we get there, the one other compromise that I think we should mention is that the Mini Shangri-La does use the headband system from cheaper HiFiMAN headphones. And I do think that's a bit of a shame with the price that you're paying. It's still comfortable, but I would have much preferred to see the suspension band style headband rather than the simple thick pad. That said, they're a very light headphone and I've generally found them comfortable for moderate to longer term listening sessions. And so let's start by talking about the Mini Shangri-La system as a system. The sound from the Mini Shangri-La, or the MSL as I might start calling it, is smooth and it's refined. It's got a bit of a mid-range emphasis or focus and it's very enjoyable for it. It's a relaxed sound, but it's not slow or unresolving. It's got the responsiveness of an electrostatic setup, but it doesn't seem to lack the note weight that I've heard from some other electrostatic systems. It's also surprisingly solid in the bass, even if it's not the most thumpy or punchy sound you're likely to hear. But that is based on listening in isolation, and it doesn't tell the whole story just yet. because there's quite a bit more to know. Before we get there, let's summarise by saying that the sound from the Mini Shangri-La system is lovely, and I think for many people it's going to be all they will ever want. However, for others, the Mini Shangri-La setup could leave you wanting a bit more. So let's talk about what might be missing from the Mini Shangri-La sound and how else you could get it. For some people, the Mini Shangri-La system could be perceived as a little bit too relaxed, a little bit too easygoing, a little bit smooth. To be clear, I am not one of those people, but I know there will be many people out there with that sentiment. A part of that, of course, is going to be the headphone, but the Energizer has a say in that sound as well. If you wanted to tweak the sound of these, you could of course just buy the headphone and then choose a different Energizer to go with them. For example, the Topping EHA5. Buying the EHA5 Energizer instead of the Mini Shangri-La Energizer will also save you about $800, so it's great on the wallet too. What you'll hear from that setup is a sound that's crisper and drier that some people might find more appealing. But I don't, because it also lacks soundstage depth and layering. I think it's also worth being aware that the EHA5 is working a lot harder to get to the same level of volume as I can get easily from the Mini Shangri-La Energizer. And that's even with the EHA5 set to high gain. That's not necessarily a problem at the levels that I was listening at, but if you need more volume range than I do for around 75 to 80 dB listening, you may run out of steam with the EHA5 and the Mini Shangri-La headphones. In contrast, the Mini Shangri-La Energizer had plenty of volume range left, and all of this was using the 4V XLR outputs from the Geshelli Labs Daisy DAC. Something else that I noticed was that the total Mini Shangri-La system of headphone and Energizer delivered a nicer tonal balance to my ears than using the headphones with the Topping EHA5. The EHA5 still sounded good, but just not quite as right. And that's really the best word that I can use here. The full MSL setup just sounded right across everything. And it's hard to put a finger on exactly where the differences lie between these two systems. There's a little more insight and nuance through the mid-range from the Mini Shangri-La Energizer, but it's quite a subtle difference. And then if we think about tonality, that's going to be a question for personal preference and subjectivity. What I think really separates these two though is the sense of energy and dynamics that you get when you're using the Mini Shangri-La Energizer. That might sound strange when I've described it as a smoother and slightly more laid-back setup, but despite the sense of refinement and smoothness, there's a sense of feel to the sound from the full MSL system that the Topping EHA5 can't quite match. There's a tactile and responsive feel to the sound when you're using the MSL Energizer that makes the sound seem real and alive, while the EHA5 sounds like just a good reproduction in comparison. And so in other words, there's nothing wrong with the setup that's using the EHA5, particularly considering the price tag, but the full MSL system is the setup that I would want to listen to, and that I had been listening to a lot since it arrived. It's just a very easy to enjoy setup across all sorts of different use cases. So yes, I really like the Mini Shangri-La system, headphone and Energizer combined, but at $2,300 you could buy yourself a really nice set of headphones and a really nice headphone amp. In fact, you could buy what might be the best bang for buck headphone in the HiFiMAN range in the form of the Aria Organic. And then you could pair it with an outstanding and affordable headphone amp in the form of something like the SMSL H400. At that point, you'd still be spending about $300 to $400 less than what you're going to spend on the Mini Shangri-La, depending of course on the pricing at the time, because we all know how much HiFiMAN love to discount and do specials and sales on their gear. And by the way, for this comparison, I didn't go with one of HiFiMAN's own all-in-one devices like an EF600 because the Mini Shangri-La system doesn't have built-in DAC, and so I wanted to keep it to a system where there was an external DAC and just a headphone amp or Energizer and a comparable headphone. But having said that, HiFiMAN's EF600 would have been another fantastic choice to pair up with the Aria Organics. As I started my listening, kicking off with These Days was a completely random choice, but an accidental stroke of genius. And that's because it immediately separated these two setups as distinctly and clearly as I could have ever hoped for. The planar magnetic setup, that's the one with the Aria Organic, was crisp and punchy. The bass on this track was solid and deep from the Arias. but that particular setup also got a touch too crisp and a touch too forceful on some of the top end notes. Swapping back to the MSL system highlighted its emphasis through the mid-range and was very enjoyable as a result, but it's also noticeably lacking bass impact when contextualized by the arias. Surprisingly, the arias also opened up the soundstage more than the electrostatic setup. And that's not to say that the MSL system sounds congested, but it couldn't provide the scale of space and separation that I was getting with the Organics and the H400. Swapping to a different track also showed that the aria setup can be more exciting and engaging when the music calls for a bit more rhythm and energy, whereas the MSL system could be just a little bit unengaging, not disengaging but unengaging, when the music calls for foot tapping and head bobbing. On the other hand, listening to Welcome to Minneapolis across the two systems served to highlight that wonderful mid-range focus that the MSL system delivers. Corey Wong's guitar work was placed under a beautiful, rich, warm spotlight when listened to through the Mini Shangri-Las. And that's perhaps not a characteristic that you'd immediately think of when you're thinking electrostatics. And I actually think that kind of sums up the Mini Shangri-La experience. It's quite an unelectrostatic sounding electrostatic system, and I love it for that reason. Hiding behind that smooth, easygoing exterior is the responsiveness and speed of an electrostatic system, but it's tuned to bring forward gorgeous mid-range quality rather than highlight speed and detail. In this comparison, the planar magnetic setup was more exciting and more technical sounding, but the electrostatic system was the one that I actually enjoyed across a wider range of music. The planar magnetic system was like a highly strung sports car that's amazing on a racetrack, but it's not always your friend on crappy B roads or C roads. The Mini Shangri-La was more like a Grand Tourer that can stretch its legs beautifully on a racetrack, but was equally comfortable and enjoyable when used as a daily driver. And so if your listening tastes lean towards a smoother, wonderfully mid-range enhanced sound, the Mini Shangri-La is just the thing, and you should check it out with the links down below. On the other hand, if you're all about technical performance, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my review of the SMSL H400 headphone amp. That's coming up very soon. And for now, you can check out my review up here of the Aria Organic and the Ananda Nano as two amazing options from the HiFiMAN headphone range. For now, I want to say a huge thanks to channel members, to channel Patreon members, and to those of you that leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.